Hey everybody, welcome back to Glenn's Garage and welcome back to the 300ZX Turbo project behind me here. So today we're going to be starting to dig into mechanical work. We're going to do timing belts. While we're doing that, obviously we're going to do water pump, probably do thermostat housing, and the cylinder head temp sensor. Going to replace that because when we checked the ECU for codes, it's throwing a code for that sensor. This is a quick recap. This is an 86 turbo 5-speed car. I picked it up about 3 months ago, about 100 kilometers away up the island. Mechanically it ran very good coming down the trip down. So since I brought it back, it's just been sitting here. It hasn't started, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's sitting on its dollies or jacked up on jack stands. So first thing I did yesterday is I charged the battery up, put it in, and turn it over. Make sure it'll still start and run. Ran beautiful, started right up, ticks over really nice and smooth. But I want to just make sure it did start before I start taking things apart, and that way I know if it doesn't start, it's something I've messed up. So why don't we head over, get in under the hood, start digging in. Okay, so I'm going to start by getting this fan and the fan shroud out of the way here. Now the fan is held to the water pump pulley with 4 nuts. You need a 10mm wrench to get those off. Your fan shroud will have, I believe it's 3 clips along the bottom that hold it in place. In my case, those clips are gone and it was zip tied in. But if your clips do happen to still be present, you'll have to disengage those. There is also a bracket here. I've removed it because this was already finished. So you have to just take that bracket, undo that bracket here so that you free up the fan shroud. You also note on this car the AC compressor, the bracket, the idler pulley bracket, that is, and of course the associated fan belt is all gone. You may well have all that there, adding some extra stuff in your vehicle that's not here, but should point out I also have the splash shield still uninstalled from working underneath, so anything that drops should drop right through to the floor. I think that'll help too with draining the coolant. Okay, there's that. Oh, there we go. This is one of those mystery parts. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to slacken off the alternator at the bracket and the power steering pump, and then get these 2 fan belts, dry belts, out of the way. Fan belts off. You got to slacken off obviously the power steering pump and the alternator to get those off, and that's pain. You'll have to undo the bolt that sits in the little slotted bracket, and then there is a tensioner nut on the back side you have to get at. They're both 12mm socket or wrench, and then you'll have to undo the top pivot bolt, if you will, so they can move. Power steering pump's not fun. The alternator is a whole nother level of pain to get at. I finally got them both. I did end up disassembling a bunch of stuff to get room down there to get my hands in to do that. So enjoy that. Next step, I'm going to drain the coolant. So I'll drain it out of the bottom of the rad, and then I believe that'll drain from this thermostat housing down and from the fill neck down. Thermostat's closed, so there'll be coolant all in the block still, and that's going to get messy when we crack the thermostat off or the water pump. There are 2 drains, one on each bank of the block, but I'm figuring after 37 years they're not going to be pretty, and I'd really rather not disturb them and end up with them leaking, so I'm going to put up with the mess that's going to get created here, I think. Alright, here we are under the car. That's the radiator drain. I assume that's the original one. It looks like for me it looks like there's a slot there for a screwdriver. I have no idea how well that's going to come out after all this time, but that's what we're going to take out. Okay, so the drain plug in the radiator came out with absolutely no issues. It's plastic, small slotted screwdriver. It unscrewed very easily. I've drained all the coolant that was going to come out is drained out now. I drained it into my oil change pan here, and it basically filled it. Gives you an idea of how much came out. I would say for 6-7 liters, gallon and a half, I suppose. Anyway, that's drained out, and then we've removed the lower rad hose here. So that's the one coming from the thermostat and then to the lower part of the radiator. It's got this rigid tube in the middle, and there's a bracket here that you've got to go back under with a, I believe, 12mm socket and an extension, and remove that screw to get that. That's all out of the way now, because that blocks getting at the covers here. So next, I'm going to take the, I believe it's 10mm socket. We'll get those bolts out and get that top cover off. Okay, so that's the top or upper timing cover off there. So we get our first look at the timing belt, and it doesn't actually look that bad at all. I mean, we're going to do it because we're here, but no cracking or anything. Doesn't appear at this point to be any missing teeth from what I can see, but yeah, we'll get her done. So I need the bottom cover off now, but to get the bottom cover off, I got to get the fun part, I think, getting the crank, the harmonic balancer off and the crank pulley off. So I guess I'm going to tackle that next. Alright, so I just went at the crank pulley bolt with my little battery operated impact, and it moved it. I couldn't believe it. It's loosened it right up. I thought I was going to have to bring the big one out. It was a little tight in there with the rad in place, but it cracked it off no problem. So I'm going to do now, I'm going to get those bolts out inside the pulley there. They're, looks like 10mm socket. So we'll get those removed. I think what I'm going to have to do is get this pulley off and that cover off, and then I can go and set the timing, because I can check all the timing marks in all 3 places, plus the distributor. So I think this is the next job. Get that off, get that lower cover off. Okay, so there's the harmonic balancer pulled off down there. I use this puller. You will need a puller of some sort. The only other thing I had to do for that puller is I had to remove the bolt that holds the alternator bracket, adjustment bracket, in place, so I could move it out of the way and I could hook the two teeth in at 90 degrees. So other than that, worked just fine. That's off now, so we'll tackle that lower cover now. Yeah, that's gone. All right, this last one I'm taking out here is also a water pump fitting. So it's a sort of weird double bolt. Well, mine's come out and left the water pump one in place. Good. All right, this should come off now. There we go. All right, so now what I've done, I've gone through each of the cam sprockets here, and I've marked, I just used a paint stick, and I've marked highlighted where the mark is. So there, and then up on the cover there's a dimple there, and the same thing on the other side. And you can see that, yeah, there's that, and then marks down there, and then down at the bottom there's a, get that there, there's a groove there in the bottom of the casting, and then I just marked the dimple. There it is. So I've got all those done now. Pulled the #1 spark plug out. I've got the distributor just sitting there, the distributor cap just sitting there. So what I'm going to do now, I put the bolt back in with just a sleeve to make sure it doesn't bottom, and I'm just going to slowly crank the motor over until I get those marks lining up with those marks at all three places. The rotor pointing to the #1 spark plug, which is this spark plug here, and check that #1 piston is up. Okay, so I've got those three lined up now, all three marks, here, there, and there. We'll check the distributor rotor here, and it is pointing at #1 there. It is pointing at #1, pretty darn close to it. Yep. All right, last thing you do, I'm just going to check and make sure my #1 piston is at top dead center there. Okay, so I just dropped a long screwdriver gently down there, and I've just moved the crank back and forth, and it is sitting about as high as it's going to sit there. And you see my mark here and here lining up with that there. I got the same down the bottom here. I don't know if you can see that with that much light, but the mark on the gear there is lined up with the V notch in the casting. So we are at top dead center. So I can slacken off this idler pulley here now. Alright, 14 mil socket on the end here of the tensioner pulley. There we go. So you put a hex key or Allen key in there, it'll adjust the tension. See that there? Oh, that's how you adjust the tension on it. So I was slacking it right off and slip it off. That's the belt that's come off, and like I said when I first looked at it, it's actually in remarkably good condition considering. Don't know when it's replaced, no record of it, so clearly would have lasted a reasonable bit of time longer there, but we're here, we're going to replace it. So all you're doing is your timing belt. This is the stage where you'll start to put things back together. Although I would highly recommend you do your water pump at the very least while you're here, because you'd have to take all this stuff apart to get at it anyway if it fails shortly after you've done all this work. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do the thermostat too, because again I have no history on it and I'm right here. So I'm going to crack that one off first. There's three 12 mil socket bolts here. I've got a big catch tray. It's actually the top of a large tote down there to kind of catch the mess. And I've got a cut up a milk jug here that I'm hoping can catch some of it. Trying to avoid a big mess in my garage. So yeah, predictably it didn't want to just come off, of course. Been here a long time, so I got just a rubber mallet. I'm going to try that. There we go. I was expecting a whole lot more coming out. There's no. Interestingly, there's no thermostat in here. Oh, it's a good job we took it apart. Okay, so anyway, 3 bolts. It's off. Certainly needs a good cleanup. Get the water pump off next. Looks to be 6 bolts. Again, they're 12mm socket. Obviously this is going to be the messy one because with no thermostat this drained whatever it could when I drained the rad. So everything sitting in the block is going to be in here. So this is the water pump fastener that also holds the front cover in place. So when you go back, that's got to go back at the driver's side, far driver's side one. All right. Okay. I was just cracking it there. I left 2 bolts in so it didn't gush everywhere. All right. Not quite as bad a mess as I thought it was going to be there. I was expecting a lot more junk coming out of the water jacket there, so that's good. We'll get that dried up and cleaned up, ready to put a water pump on. The water pump, the thermostat out, and then the last thing I'm planning to take out is the cylinder head temp sensor. I'm going to replace that. I'm going to see if I can get that disconnected there. If you can see, there is a yellow, you can just about see it there, yellow connector. It's got one of those little wire clips in it. Now I've read you can just go down from the top and with a screwdriver and break it, and I'm not a big fan of just breaking stuff, so I'm going to see if I can get it disconnected. So I managed to snap the little wire retaining clip off, so this should come out now. There we go. It did actually break slightly in one place there. Anyways, it's pretty brittle. The wire covers are starting to go there, so we'll be replacing that. Now I've got to get that connector out of there, that sensor out of there. Ended up what I had to do was break the connector off the sensor there, which is a little brutal, I suppose. And then what I've done is as I was trying to break that off, I actually ended up with a pry bar in there. I ended up being able to pull this cover out of the way a bit. I'm going to tap it back in when the sensor goes in, so at least that gives me access now. And it seems like it's a 19mm socket that's going to fit on there. Alright. Okay. That's what's left of it after you brutalize the end of it. But it is out now. And I think we actually have access to put a new one in as well. Alright, so I thought I was done with the disassembly there. I thought I got everything ready to start putting it back together. And now having a closer look, I've realized I've got a leaking cam seal. So I'm going to have to go in and get the cam seals out and replace those as well. So I've got to get the cam gear off now. It's a 14mm socket. Now the trick here, I think, is we don't want this turning, because if that's turning, it's moving the valves while the pistons are not moving. So you're going to run the risk that a valve's going to drop down onto a piston or something. So we want to keep it basically in the same position. Now, I'm sure there are tools out there to do it. I've MacGyvered a simple tool together here. I had this bar. It's actually for removing a fan on an N92 BMW motor. It's one of 2 parts to get the front fan off. But it had the clearance for a nut, and it had a hole in a slot. So what I've done is I've bolted 2 sockets onto here, nut and bolt, and they're about the size of the hole in the cam gear there, so I can put that like that, and hold it while I put the impact on that. All right, let's try and give this a go. Well, that's not shifting it. Okay, so I ended up just cracking this now with my breaker bar, the 14mm socket. So it's loose now. This worked good actually. There we go. Okay. Okay, so this should be the seal here. We've got to pop off next. All right, so I've tried putting a pick in here, around here, giving it a tug. That didn't move it. I tried the old can opener, paint can opener in here and a good tug, and that hasn't moved it. So we're getting down to the brutal stuff right now. We're going to use the old screwdriver and a hammer and brutalize the thing out. I don't like doing it this way, but it has to come out. And of course you don't want to damage anything here because that's your sealing surface on the cam. So there we go. Okay, that's the old one out now. So we're going to do exactly the same thing to the other side, and then we'll be ready to start reassembling things. All right, I do believe that's now all the disassembly completed to do timing belt, water pump, thermostat, temperature sensor for the cylinder head, and the front cam seals. Turned into quite a job. Anyway, next video, I'm going to start getting it all back together. In the meantime, I'm going to start doing some refinishing and painting and cleanup of all the parts that have come off so they look new when they go back together. So I hope I see you back in the garage for part 2, putting this whole thing back together, start it up, and hopefully show run.